A little girl stood trembling beside an industrial dumpster in a dark alley, her tiny finger pointing at the rusted metal container while tears streamed down her dirt-streaked face. At first glance, it seemed like nothing more than a quiet evening on a narrow street near Millennium Park, but the desperate sobs of a child shattered the peaceful atmosphere, cutting through the hum of distant traffic and the murmur of passers-by. "Please, you have to believe me. My mommy is trapped inside. Please save her." The girl couldn't have been older than 6. Her pink dress was torn and stained with grime, her tangled brown hair falling across her face. She clutched a worn teddy bear against her chest as if it were her only anchor to the world. She wasn't just crying, she was begging. Her small hands gestured frantically toward the dumpster, her voice raw and broken. A woman walking her dog glanced over, then shook her head and whispered to her companion, "Poor thing, she's probably making up stories. Her mother must have abandoned her." An elderly man with a cane shuffled closer, peered at the dumpster, then at the child. He clicked his tongue dismissively. "Impossible. There's nothing in there but garbage. No one could survive inside that thing." One by one, people looked. One by one, they walked away. No one lifted the lid. No one dared to try. They left the little girl sobbing alone, as if her pleas had nothing to do with them. Then a black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a stop at the mouth of the alley. The door swung open, and polished black leather shoes touched the cracked pavement. Dominic Castellano stepped out, his 3-piece charcoal suit fitting him like a second skin, projecting an aura of authority that made the few remaining onlookers instinctively step back. A Rolex gleamed on his wrist. His jaw was sharp, his dark eyes cold and unreadable. At 37, he carried the kind of presence that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He was supposed to be heading to a meeting, important business, the kind that didn't wait, but the sound of the child's crying pierced through his thoughts. Dominic paused, his brow furrowing slightly. He was about to turn away when he felt something tug at the fabric of his tailored pants. He looked down. The little girl had run to him. Her tiny hands, smeared with dirt, gripped his trouser leg with surprising strength. Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, lifted to meet his. "Please, mister. Please save my mommy. She's locked inside there. No one believes me." Those eyes, large, desperate, yet still clinging to a fragile thread of hope. They stared up at him, not with the mischievous pout of a child seeking attention, but with the raw terror of someone about to lose everything. Dominic stared down at those pleading eyes, and for a moment, something inside him wavered. But reason quickly took hold. A child claiming her mother was trapped inside a dumpster? It was absurd. Impossible. The ramblings of a frightened little girl whose mind had conjured up some fantasy to cope with whatever trauma she had experienced. He had seen enough of the world to know that not every cry for help was real, and he had learned long ago that getting involved in other people's problems only led to complications. His mind flashed to the meeting waiting for him across town. 3 of his most important business partners were expecting him in less than an hour. Millions of dollars were on the line, deals that had taken months to negotiate. He couldn't afford to be late, certainly not for some stranger's child spinning wild tales on a street corner. Dominic reached down and gently but firmly pried the girl's fingers from his pants. "Go find your family," he said, his voice flat and cold. "Don't cling to strangers." The little girl's face crumpled. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks as she watched him turn away. Dominic walked across the street and pushed open the door to a small cafe. The warmth inside wrapped around him, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the air. He ordered an espresso, sat down by the window, and pulled out his phone to check his messages. But he couldn't focus. His eyes kept drifting to the window, to the narrow alley across the street. She was still there. The little girl stood exactly where he had left her, clutching her teddy bear, her small body shivering in the evening chill. People walked past her without a second glance. A group of teenagers pointed and laughed. An old woman shook her head and muttered something to her companion. Poor thing. Her mother probably ran off and left her. That's why she's making up stories. Dominic lifted his espresso to his lips, but the bitter liquid tasted like nothing. The girl's words echoed in his mind, refusing to fade. "My mommy is locked inside there." He set the cup down harder than he intended, the ceramic clinking sharply against the saucer. This was ridiculous. He had no obligation to that child, no connection to her whatsoever. Whatever had happened to her was not his problem. He forced himself to finish his coffee, paid the bill, and stepped back outside. The sun had nearly set. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the pavement, and there she was. Lily had collapsed onto the ground, her back against the cold brick wall. She hugged her teddy bear tightly, her thin shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She looked so small, so utterly alone. Dominic stood frozen for a long moment, watching her. Then he turned, walked to his car, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, he saw her lift her head. Her eyes followed his car as it disappeared down the street. Those eyes, the eyes of someone watching their last hope slip away into the darkness. The garage door closed behind him, and Dominic's footsteps echoed through the vast hallway of his mansion. Every surface gleamed with cold perfection. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. Priceless artwork adorned the walls. Italian marble stretched beneath his feet. Yet despite its grandeur, the house felt hollow, empty, a monument to wealth that held no warmth. Dominic loosened his tie, set a glass of whiskey on the oak desk in his study, and sank into the leather chair. The amber liquid caught the dim light, but he didn't drink. He just stared at it, his mind somewhere else entirely. Those eyes, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape them. Large and desperate, brimming with tears, yet still clinging to the faintest flicker of hope. The little girl's face haunted him like a ghost that refused to be exorcised. "My mommy is locked inside there." He lifted the glass to his lips but set it down again without taking a sip. Why did her words cut so deep? Why couldn't he simply forget her like he had forgotten countless others who had crossed his path? The answer came unbidden, rising from a place he had buried long ago. Suddenly, he was no longer sitting in his study. He was 8 years old again, standing in the middle of a crowded street, his small voice screaming something terrible, something no one wanted to hear. "Please, you have to listen. Something bad happened. Please believe me." But the adults only shook their heads. Some laughed, others turned away in disgust. "That boy is lying again. Ignore him. He just wants attention. Someone should teach him a lesson about making up stories." Young Dominic had stood there, tears streaming down his face, watching as one by one, everyone abandoned him. No one believed him, no one cared. The truth he carried was too heavy for his small shoulders, and the world had simply refused to help him bear it. That day, something inside him shattered, and from the broken pieces, he built a wall, a fortress of ice and steel around his heart. He swore he would never be that vulnerable again, never trust anyone, never let anyone close enough to hurt him. The memory faded, and Dominic found himself back in the present, his hand trembling slightly around the whiskey glass. Lily's eyes. They were the same, the exact same desperate, pleading eyes he had once seen in his own reflection. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, gazing out at the Chicago skyline glittering against the black canvas of night. Sleep didn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, the little girl shivering beside that dumpster, alone in the cold, waiting for someone to believe her. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2. At 5 in the morning, Dominic grabbed his car keys. "I have to go back." What he was about to discover would shake the entire city to its core. Dawn crept over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pale gray and muted gold. The alley looked even more desolate in the early morning light. Puddles from last night's rain reflected the dim glow of street lamps that hadn't yet switched off. The air was cold and damp, carrying the faint smell of wet concrete and rotting garbage. The black Rolls-Royce turned the corner and stopped at the entrance of the alley. Dominic stepped out, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. His eyes scanned the narrow passageway, part of him hoping he wouldn't find what he was looking for. But there she was. His heart stopped. Lily was still there, curled up against the base of the dumpster, her small body pressed against the cold metal as if guarding it. Her pink dress was soaked through, clinging to her thin frame. Her lips had turned a frightening shade of blue. The teddy bear remained clutched in her arms, its matted fur as wet as everything else. She had been here all night, through the rain, through the cold. She hadn't moved an inch. The soft rumble of the car engine made her stir. Lily lifted her head slowly, her movements weak and sluggish. Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, squinted against the pale light. When she recognized him, something flickered across her face. Disbelief, then a fragile, trembling hope. She struggled to her feet, her legs shaking so badly she nearly collapsed. But she pushed forward, stumbling toward him with what little strength she had left. "You came back." Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse and broken from hours of sobbing. "You came back." Dominic felt something crack inside his chest. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, she looked even worse. Her skin was pale as paper. Her entire body trembled violently from the cold. "You've been here all night?" he asked, his voice unusually soft. Lily nodded, her teeth chattering. "I couldn't leave. If I left, Mommy would disappear. I know she's still in there. She's waiting for me. The conviction in her voice, the unwavering certainty in those exhausted eyes. This wasn't a child playing pretend. This was a little girl who had spent an entire night in the freezing rain because she believed with every fiber of her being that her mother was trapped inside that dumpster. Dominic turned to look at the rusted metal container. In the gray morning light, it no longer seemed like just a piece of urban debris. It loomed before him like a sealed coffin, hiding some terrible secret within. A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Marco, bring men to the alley near Millennium Park. Now." He ended the call and looked back at Lily. The little girl reached out and wrapped her small, icy fingers around his hand. She held on tight, as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. For the first time in her ordeal, someone was willing to believe her. Within 15 minutes, a black SUV screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. Marco Vitelli stepped out first, his weathered face tight with concern. 2 of Dominic's men followed close behind, carrying crowbars and heavy-duty tools. At 40 years old, Marco had served as Dominic's right hand for over a decade. He had seen many things in that time, but the sight of his boss kneeling beside a shivering little girl was something entirely new. "What's going on, boss?" Marco asked, his eyes scanning the scene. Dominic stood, keeping Lily close behind him. "Open that dumpster." Marco didn't question the order. He signaled to the men, and they approached the rusted container. By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. Early morning joggers, shop owners opening their stores, curious neighbors drawn by the commotion. Whispers rippled through the growing audience. "Isn't that the crazy girl from yesterday? What are they doing? There's nothing in there but garbage." The wail of a police siren cut through the murmurs. A patrol car pulled up, and Detective James Harrison climbed out. He was a heavy-set man in his early 50s, his uniform straining at the buttons, his small eyes perpetually narrowed with suspicion. Harrison walked over, his gaze shifting between Dominic and the dumpster. "Mr. Castellano," he said, forcing a tone of politeness that barely masked his skepticism. "You sure about this? The whole city knows about this kid's stories." Dominic's expression remained ice-cold. "Open it." Harrison hesitated, then shrugged and gestured to his officers. "You heard the man." Lily stood behind Dominic, her small body trembling, but her eyes never left the dumpster. Her fingers gripped the back of his coat as if drawing strength from his presence. The men positioned their crowbars along the edges of the heavy lid. Metal scraped against metal, the sound sharp and grating in the morning air. Rust flaked off in chunks as they pried. Then the lid flew open and slammed against the brick wall. A wave of stench hit them immediately. The sour, rotting smell of garbage mixed with something else, something damp and sickly, the odor of human suffering. Several onlookers covered their noses. Someone gagged. And then, from within the pile of trash bags and filth, a hand emerged. Weak, trembling, but unmistakably human. The world seemed to freeze. Marco reached in and carefully pushed aside the debris. What he revealed made even the hardened detective stumble backward. A woman lay curled at the bottom of the dumpster. Her long, dark hair was matted with blood and grime. Her floral dress hung in tatters, torn and stained beyond recognition. Bruises covered her arms and face. Her wrists bore the angry red marks of rope burns. She was barely breathing, but she was alive. "Mommy!" Lily broke free from Dominic and rushed forward, her scream piercing the stunned silence. The woman stirred. With tremendous effort, her swollen eyes fluttered open, searching for the familiar voice. "Lily," she whispered, her voice broken and faint. "My baby." Chaos erupted. Harrison barked orders into his radio, calling for an ambulance. The crowd gasped and cried out in horror. Camera phones appeared, capturing the nightmare unfolding before them. Dominic stood frozen, unable to move. The little girl had been telling the truth, all along, every single word. He watched Lily cling to her mother's hand, sobbing uncontrollably, and something deep within his chest shattered into pieces. Who had done this? The question burned in his mind, demanding an answer. And that answer would lead to a darkness far deeper than anyone could have imagined. St. Mary's Hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. The ambulance had rushed Rachel Morgan through the emergency doors, doctors and nurses swarming around her stretcher like a well-coordinated machine. Dominic had followed in his car, with Lily clutching his hand the entire way, refusing to let go. 3 hours passed before a weary physician emerged from the treatment room. "She's stable now," the doctor announced, his face lined with exhaustion, severe dehydration, hypothermia, multiple soft tissue injuries across her body, consistent with being beaten. "She's lucky to be alive." Another few hours in that condition, and we would be having a very different conversation. Dominic absorbed the words in silence. Each medical term felt like another weight pressing against his chest. Inside the room, Lily sat on a small chair beside her mother's bed. She had refused to leave even for a moment, her tiny hand wrapped around Rachel's fingers as if afraid her mother might vanish again. The worn teddy bear rested on her lap, still damp from the night's rain. Detective Harrison stood in the hallway with Dominic, his notebook open. "We need her statement as soon as she's conscious," Harrison said. "Any idea who might have done this?" Dominic shook his head slowly, though a dark suspicion was already forming in his mind. An hour later, Rachel's eyes fluttered open. Harrison entered the room cautiously, keeping his voice low and gentle. "Miss Morgan, I'm Detective Harrison. I know you've been through something terrible, but we need to know who did this to you. Can you tell us?" Rachel's gaze drifted to Lily first, her cracked lips trembling into a weak smile when she saw her daughter safe. Then her expression changed. Fear crept into her eyes, followed by something even more painful: betrayal. "It was my brother," she whispered, each word scraping against her throat. "Vincent." Harrison's pen stopped moving. "Your brother?" Rachel nodded, tears sliding down her bruised cheeks. "He came to my house 2 nights ago. He had papers. He wanted me to sign over the inheritance our parents left me. The house, the savings, everything." Her voice broke as the memories flooded back. "I refused. I told him that money belonged to Lily's future. He lost control. He hit me, again and again. When I still wouldn't sign, he forced me to drink something. Everything went dark." She closed her eyes, her body shaking. "When I woke up, I was trapped, surrounded by garbage. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die." Dominic's fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles turning white. "Lily was hiding under the bed," Rachel continued, her voice barely audible. "She saw everything. After Vincent left, she followed him outside and found where he dumped me. She stayed there the whole time. My brave little girl." Rachel reached out suddenly, grabbing Dominic's hand with surprising strength. "Please," she begged, her eyes desperate. "Protect Lily. Vincent won't stop. He needs that money. He'll come for her." Dominic looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep against her mother's side, exhaustion finally claiming her small body. In that moment, watching the little girl who had endured so much, a silent promise formed in his heart. The news spread like wildfire across Chicago. "Woman found alive in dumpster" dominated every headline, every news channel, every social media feed. Reporters camped outside St. Mary's Hospital, desperate for interviews. The story captivated the city, a tale of horror that seemed too terrible to be real. But Vincent Morgan was not about to let his carefully constructed world collapse. Within 24 hours, he hired Derek Chen, one of the most ruthless defense attorneys in Illinois. Chen specialized in one thing: manipulating public opinion, and he was very good at his job. 2 days after Rachel was rescued, Vincent appeared on Chicago's most-watched evening talk show. He wore a pale gray sweater, deliberately chosen to project humility and warmth. His face was carefully arranged into an expression of anguish, his eyes glistening with tears that seemed to flow on command. "This has been a nightmare for our family," Vincent said, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. "My sister Rachel has struggled with severe depression ever since her husband passed away 3 years ago. She's had episodes before: self-harm, delusions. I've tried everything to get her help." The host leaned forward sympathetically. "So you're saying this wasn't an attack?" Vincent shook his head sadly. "Rachel has always believed people were out to get her. That night, we had an argument. I just wanted her to seek treatment. She panicked and ran out. I never imagined she would do something so extreme to herself." He produced documents, medical records showing a history of psychiatric treatment, statements from neighbors claiming they had heard Rachel screaming at invisible enemies, all fabricated, all meticulously prepared. Then came the expert witness. Dr. Phillips, a psychiatrist with an impressive list of credentials, appeared on screen. "Based on the records I've reviewed, Miss Morgan exhibits classic symptoms of acute delusional disorder. Self-destructive behavior, including hiding in confined spaces, is not uncommon in such cases." The tide of public opinion began to shift. Poor Vincent. Imagine having to take care of a mentally ill sister. Maybe she really did do this to herself. That little girl probably learned to lie from her crazy mother. Dominic watched the broadcast from his penthouse suite, a glass of whiskey in his hand. As Vincent's performance continued, his grip tightened around the crystal tumbler until it shattered, shards cutting into his palm. He didn't even feel the blood. His phone buzzed. Marco's voice was grim. "Boss, The police are considering suspending the investigation. Harrison says there's pressure from above. They're starting to believe Vincent's story. Dominic's jaw clenched. There's more, Marco continued. They've transferred Rachel to the psychiatric ward for observation, and social services is moving to take custody of the girl. The words hit Dominic like a physical blow. Rachel, the victim, was now being treated as a mental patient, and Lily, the brave little girl who had stood in the rain all night to save her mother, was about to be taken away. Vincent was winning, but Dominic refused to let that happen. The social workers arrived at St. Mary's Hospital the next morning. There were two of them, a stern-faced woman in a gray suit carrying a clipboard, and a younger man who looked uncomfortable with the task at hand. They walked with purpose through the psychiatric ward, their footsteps echoing against the cold linoleum floor. Rachel was sitting up in bed when they entered, Lily curled beside her, the worn teddy bear pressed between them. For a brief moment, mother and daughter had found peace in each other's presence. That peace was about to be shattered. "Miss Morgan," the woman announced, her voice flat and official. "I'm Margaret Walsh from Child Protective Services. Based on your current psychiatric evaluation, you have been deemed unfit to care for your daughter. We have a court order to place Lily in temporary custody at a state facility." Rachel's face went pale. "What? No, you can't do this." "I'm afraid it's already been decided." Walsh held up the paperwork. "The child will be transferred to Hope Haven until your mental health status is properly assessed." Lily looked up, confusion turning to terror as the meaning of the words sank in. "Mommy, what are they saying?" Rachel grabbed her daughter's hand, her voice rising in desperation. "You can't take her. I'm not crazy. My brother did this to me. Please, you have to believe me." But the social workers had heard it all before. To them, this was just another delusional patient making excuses. The younger man stepped forward, reaching for Lily. "No!" Lily screamed and threw her arms around her mother, clinging with all her strength. "I'm not going. Mommy isn't crazy. She's not. Uncle Vincent hurt her. I saw it." Rachel sobbed, trying to hold on to her daughter, but two nurses rushed in to restrain her. "Please, don't take my baby. Please. Mommy! Mommy!" The scene was chaos, Lily kicking and screaming, Rachel crying hysterically, the social workers prying the little girl away from her mother's arms. And then Dominic appeared in the doorway. He had come to check on them, expecting a quiet visit. Instead, he walked into a nightmare. Lily saw him immediately. She broke free from the social worker's grip and ran toward him, crashing into his legs with desperate force. "Mr. Dominic, please don't let them take me. Mommy isn't sick. She's not crazy. Please." Dominic knelt down and wrapped his arms around the trembling child. She felt so small, so fragile. Her heart was pounding against his chest like a frightened bird. He looked up at Walsh. "Is there any way to stop this? Are you a relative? No, then there's nothing you can do." The words were a blade. Dominic held Lily tighter, his mind racing for solutions. But legally, he had no standing, no rights. He was just a stranger who had stumbled into their lives. "I'll come visit you," he said softly, looking into Lily's tear-filled eyes. "I promise, and I will bring your mother back to you." Lily was pulled from his arms, still reaching for him as the social workers led her away. She looked back over her shoulder. Her eyes locked onto his until she disappeared around the corner. Those eyes, pleading, heartbroken, losing hope all over again. Dominic stood motionless in the empty hallway, his fists clenched so tight his nails drew blood from his palms. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marco. "Mobilize everything we have. Vincent Morgan will pay for this." The real war had just begun. Dominic's mansion transformed overnight into a command center. The grand dining room, once used for elaborate dinner parties, now held sprawling maps, stacks of documents, and multiple laptop screens glowing in the dim light. Men in dark suits moved with quiet efficiency, exchanging folders and speaking in hushed tones. This was the other side of Dominic Castellano, the side that had built an empire from the shadows of Chicago, the side that most people only whispered about. Marco stood at the head of the table, spreading out a series of photographs and financial records. "Vincent Morgan is drowning in debt," Marco reported, his voice low and steady. "He owes $2 million to underground gambling operations. If he doesn't pay within the month, he's a dead man." Dominic studied the documents, his expression unreadable. So that's why he needed Rachel's inheritance. Exactly. Their parents left everything to Rachel when they died. The house, the savings, all of it. Vincent got nothing. He's been desperate to get his hands on that money ever since. The pieces were falling into place. Vincent hadn't attacked his sister out of madness. It was calculated, premeditated. He needed her to sign over the assets, and when she refused, he tried to eliminate her entirely. Dominic picked up his phone and dialed. "Anthony, I need you to dig into Dr. Phillips. Find every connection he has to Vincent Morgan, and examine those psychiatric records. I want to know exactly how they were fabricated." Anthony Russo, Dominic's personal attorney, was a shark in a courtroom. Within hours, he called back with results. Phillips owed Vincent money from a failed business venture 3 years ago. A significant amount. That's why he agreed to falsify Rachel's medical history. Vincent had leverage over him. Dominic's jaw tightened. The corruption ran deeper than he had imagined. He assigned 2 of his best men to shadow Vincent around the clock. Every meeting, every phone call, every move would be documented, but surveillance alone wouldn't be enough. He needed the law on his side. That evening, Dominic placed a call to Detective Harrison. "I have information about Vincent Morgan. Meet me tonight." There was a long pause on the other end. When Harrison finally spoke, his voice was cold. "You're Mafia, Castellano. I don't work with criminals." Dominic's response was ice. "You can hate me all you want, detective, but don't let a 6-year-old girl and her mother pay the price for your pride." Silence stretched between them. "Where?" Harrison finally asked. They met at a quiet diner on the outskirts of the city. Dominic slid a folder across the table, containing records of Vincent's gambling debts, his connections to loan sharks, and preliminary evidence linking Dr. Phillips to forged documents. Harrison flipped through the pages, his frown deepening with each revelation. "This doesn't prove he attacked his sister." "Not yet," Dominic admitted, "but it proves motive. And it proves the psychiatric evaluation is compromised." Harrison closed the folder, conflict visible in his eyes. "I need more. A witness. Something concrete." Dominic nodded slowly. He had one more arrow left to fire, but first, he needed to find someone willing to tell the truth. Hope Haven Children's Shelter stood at the edge of the city like a forgotten monument to broken childhoods. The building was old and gray, its brick walls stained with decades of neglect. Iron bars covered the windows. The playground outside sat empty, its rusted swings creaking in the cold wind. It looked less like a shelter and more like a place where hope came to die. Dominic's Rolls-Royce looked grotesquely out of place as it pulled into the cracked parking lot. Getting inside required more than just a request. It required a generous donation to the facility's operating fund. Money that Dominic handed over without hesitation, whatever it took. A tired-looking staff member led him through dim hallways that smelled of industrial cleaner and stale air. Children's drawings hung on the walls, their bright colors a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere. They stopped at a common room filled with mismatched furniture and a few scattered toys. Several children sat around, some reading, others staring blankly out the barred windows. And there, in the far corner, sat Lily. She was curled up on a plastic orange chair, her knees pulled to her chest. Mr. Teddy was clutched tightly against her, as if the worn bear was the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. Her eyes were hollow, empty. The spark that had once burned so fiercely was barely visible. Dominic felt his chest tighten at the sight. Lily, her head snapped up. For a moment, she just stared, as if unable to believe what she was seeing. Then recognition flooded her face, and she launched herself out of the chair. "Mr. Dominic! You came! You really came!" She crashed into him, her small arms wrapping around his waist with desperate strength. Her whole body trembled. Dominic knelt down and held her close. "I told you I would come. I keep my promises." Lily pulled back, her eyes searching his face. "Are you going to take me to Mommy?" "Soon," he said softly. "I'm working on it." They sat together on a worn couch, Lily pressed against his side. She was quiet for a long moment before speaking again. "Mommy told me something important," she whispered, glancing around as if afraid someone might hear. "She said I have to keep Mr. Teddy safe no matter what. She said there's a secret inside him." Dominic looked at the teddy bear. For the first time, he noticed a crude line of stitching running along its belly. Uneven, hasty, done by someone in a hurry. "Can you show me the secret, Lily?" The little girl hesitated, hugging the bear protectively. Then, slowly, she nodded. Dominic carefully pulled at the loose stitches, his fingers working gently so as not to damage the toy. The seam opened, revealing yellowed stuffing inside, and nestled within that stuffing was a small black USB drive. His heart began to pound. Back at his mansion, Dominic inserted the USB into his laptop. A single audio file appeared on the screen. He clicked play. Static crackled first. Then Rachel's voice, trembling with fear. "Vincent, please, this is Lily's inheritance. You can't do this." And then Vincent's voice, cold and vicious, stripped of all pretense. "Sign the papers, now, or you and that little brat will rot in the garbage where no one will ever find you." Dominic sat frozen, the recording washing over him like ice water. This was it, the weapon that could destroy Vincent Morgan. But would it be enough to win in court? Vincent Morgan paced his luxurious apartment, a glass of wine trembling in his hand. Something was wrong. He could feel it. The investigation had been suspended. Public opinion had turned in his favor. Rachel was locked away in a psychiatric ward where no one would believe a word she said. Everything should have been perfect. But Dominic Castellano's involvement changed everything. Vincent had hired a private investigator to find out why a powerful man like Castellano would care about some random woman and her child. The report that came back made his blood run cold. Castellano had visited the girl at Hope Haven. He had been seen leaving with something in his pocket. And there were rumors that he was gathering evidence against Vincent, the teddy bear. Vincent slammed his wineglass down, the crimson liquid sloshing over the rim. Rachel had been clutching that filthy stuffed animal when he dragged her out of the house. She had begged him to let her keep it for Lily. At the time, he thought nothing of it. A sentimental gesture from a desperate woman. But what if she had hidden something inside? "That little brat might have evidence," Vincent muttered, his face twisting with fury. "I have to get that bear." He made a phone call. Money exchanged hands. A plan was set in motion. That night, a shadow slipped through the darkness surrounding Hope Haven. The security at the children's shelter was minimal. A single guard dozed at the front desk. The windows on the ground floor were old, their locks rusted and weak. The intruder moved silently through the corridors, counting doors until he reached the room where the youngest children slept. Lily lay in her small bed, curled beneath a thin blanket. Her pillow was clutched against her chest, her face troubled even in sleep. A gloved hand clamped over her mouth. Lily's eyes flew open, wide with terror. She tried to scream, but the hand pressed harder. "Where's the teddy bear?" A harsh voice hissed in her ear. "Give it to me, and your mommy stays alive. Make a sound, and I'll make sure you never see her again." Tears streamed down Lily's cheeks. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. But through her fear, she remembered Dominic's words when he had taken Mr. Teddy for safekeeping. "No matter what happens, don't tell anyone about this. I'll keep it safe for you and your mom." Lily shook her head frantically, pointing to the empty corner where she had always kept the bear. The intruder cursed and began searching the room, throwing aside blankets and pillows. Then footsteps thundered down the hallway. The door burst open. A large man in a security uniform charged in, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Hey! Stop right there!" The intruder bolted for the window, crashing through the glass and disappearing into the night. Lily collapsed onto her mattress, sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her pillow as if it were a lifeline. Miles away, Dominic's phone buzzed with a message from Marco. "Boss, someone tried to break into Hope Haven. The girl is safe. Our man got there in time." Dominic stared at the screen, his knuckles white around the device. Vincent had made his move. He was desperate enough to send someone after a 6-year-old child in the middle of the night. This had gone far enough. Dominic stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. He would get Lily out of that place, whatever it took. The morning after the break-in, Dominic sat across from Anthony Russo in the lawyer's downtown office. "I want temporary custody of the girl." Russo nearly choked on his coffee. He set the cup down slowly, staring at Dominic as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. "You want what?" "Custody. Of Lily Morgan. I want her out of that shelter and under my protection." Russo leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Dominic, listen to yourself. You know what you are. The court will never grant custody to someone with your reputation." Dominic's eyes turned to ice. "On paper, I am a legitimate businessman. I own restaurants, real estate, investment firms. Every tax return is clean. Every background check comes back spotless. You know this because you made sure of it. But still, make it happen, Anthony." The finality in his voice left no room for argument. Russo sighed heavily, already reaching for his phone. "I'll need to call in every favor I have, and we'll need grounds for emergency placement. The girl was attacked last night. Someone broke into the shelter trying to get to her. She's not safe there." That changed everything. Russo worked through the day and into the night, filing emergency motions, contacting judges, pulling strings that only a man of Dominic's resources could afford. The argument was straightforward. Lily Morgan faced an imminent threat to her safety, and the state facility had failed to protect her. Detective Harrison provided crucial support, submitting an official report about the break-in and confirming that the incident appeared connected to the ongoing investigation into Vincent Morgan. 2 days later, The judge delivered the ruling. Given the documented threat to the child's safety and the inability of Hope Haven to provide adequate protection, the court grants temporary guardianship to Mr. Dominic Castellano, pending further review. The gavel fell. It was done. Dominic arrived at Hope Haven that afternoon. The staff watched nervously as he walked through the front doors, his presence commanding the space like a king entering a conquered territory. Lily was waiting in the common room, clutching her pillow, her eyes red from crying and sleepless nights. When she saw him, her face crumpled. She ran. "Mr. Dominic!" She crashed into his legs, her small arms wrapping around him, her body shaking with sobs. "I was so scared. I thought no one was coming. I thought he would come back." Dominic knelt and lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Her head fell against his shoulder, and he could feel her tears soaking through his jacket. "No one will hurt you again," he said quietly. "I promise." The drive to the mansion was silent. Lily sat in the back seat, staring out the window, her hand clutching Dominic's sleeve as if afraid he might disappear. At the estate, a room had been prepared for her. Soft pink walls, a canopy bed with silk sheets, shelves filled with toys and books, new clothes hanging in the closet. Lily looked around in wonder, but only for a moment. Then she turned to Dominic, her voice small and fragile. "When is Mommy coming home?" Dominic knelt to meet her eyes. "Soon, Lily. I'm going to bring her back to you." That night, he stood in the doorway of her room, watching her sleep. Mr. Teddy, now safely returned, was tucked under her arm. He had made a promise, and he would keep it, even if it meant taking on the entire world. Dominic's mansion had transformed into a war room. The grand study, once lined with rare books and antique furniture, now overflowed with documents, laptops, and legal files. A whiteboard dominated one wall, covered in photographs, timelines, and red string connecting the pieces of evidence like a spider's web. Russo and his team of attorneys worked around the clock, fueled by endless cups of coffee and the knowledge that failure was not an option. Sleep became a luxury none of them could afford. The first piece of evidence was the USB recording. Dominic had hired one of the best audio forensic experts in the country to analyze it. After 3 days of meticulous examination, the expert delivered his verdict. "The recording is authentic," he confirmed, sliding his report across the table. "No signs of splicing, editing, or digital manipulation. The background noise is consistent with a small enclosed room, likely a residential space. The voices belong to 2 distinct individuals, one male and one female." Russo nodded, making notes. "That's enough to establish authenticity. The court will have to accept it." The second piece was Vincent's gambling debt. Marco had compiled a comprehensive file documenting Vincent's downward spiral into underground casinos and illegal betting operations. Bank statements showed desperate withdrawals. Photographs captured him entering notorious gambling dens. Testimonies from loan sharks confirmed he owed nearly $2 million, with a deadline that had already passed. "This is his motive," Dominic said, tapping the folder. He needed Rachel's inheritance to save his own skin. The third piece connected Dr. Phillips to Vincent. Russo's investigators had uncovered financial records showing that Phillips had invested in a business venture with Vincent 5 years ago. The venture failed catastrophically, leaving Phillips deeply in debt to his partner. That debt had never been repaid, at least not in money. Vincent used that leverage to force Phillips into falsifying Rachel's psychiatric evaluation, Russo explained. "We can prove the medical records are fraudulent, but there was still a gap. We need a witness," Russo said, frustration creeping into his voice. "Someone who saw Vincent threaten or attack Rachel directly. The recording is powerful, but a living, breathing person on the stand would seal the case." Marco cleared his throat. "I might have something, boss." All eyes turned to him. "There's a nurse named Emma Collins. She worked at St. Mary's the morning Rachel was admitted. According to hospital logs, she was on duty when Vincent visited his sister. Word is, she saw something. Find her," Dominic ordered. Emma Collins lived in a modest apartment on the south side of Chicago. When Marco's men first approached her, she refused to even open the door. She was terrified. Vincent had connections, influence. Speaking out could cost her everything. Dominic went himself. He stood in her doorway, his presence filling the cramped hallway. Emma was young, no more than 28, with tired eyes that spoke of too many difficult shifts and too many sleepless nights. "Miss Collins," Dominic said, his voice calm but firm, "you can choose to stay silent and let a guilty man walk free, or you can help a 6-year-old girl get her mother back." Emma's hands trembled. Tears welled in her eyes. "I saw him," she whispered. "I saw Vincent grab Rachel's arm. He was forcing her to sign papers. She was crying, begging him to stop. "Will you testify?" A long pause. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I'll do it." The final piece had fallen into place. The battle was about to begin, the night before the trial. Silence hung over the mansion like a heavy fog. Dominic sat alone in his study, the desk lamp casting a warm circle of light over the stacks of documents spread before him. He had reviewed the evidence dozens of times. The audio recording, the financial records, the witness statements. Every piece had been checked and rechecked. Tomorrow, everything would be decided. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. The clock on the wall showed nearly midnight. He should sleep, but his mind refused to quiet down. Then he heard it, soft footsteps padding across the marble floor. He looked up to find Lily standing in the doorway. Mr. Teddy clutched against her chest. Her hair was tangled from tossing in bed, and her eyes were wide and troubled. "I can't sleep," she whispered. Dominic pushed back from the desk and opened his arms. Lily crossed the room and climbed into his lap, curling against him like a small, frightened animal seeking shelter from a storm. He wrapped his arms around her, feeling the rapid flutter of her heartbeat. Together, they moved to the large window that overlooked the Chicago skyline. The city glittered below, a sea of light stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Rachel was waiting, hoping, praying. "Mr. Dominic?" Lily's voice was barely audible. "Yes? Is Mommy coming home tomorrow?" Dominic hesitated. He had never been one to make promises he couldn't keep, but looking down at those hopeful eyes, he found he couldn't bear to disappoint her. "I'm going to do everything I can to bring her back to you." Lily nodded slowly, accepting his answer. Then she asked something that caught him off guard. "Why did you believe me? That first day, when nobody else did. Why did you come back?" The question struck deeper than she could have known. For a long moment, Dominic said nothing. The memories he had buried for so long stirred in the darkness of his mind. "Because I know what it feels like," he finally said, his voice rough. "When I was a little boy, something terrible happened. I tried to tell people. I begged them to believe me, but no one listened. They called me a liar. They laughed at me." Lily looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "That's so sad." "It was," Dominic admitted, "and it hurt for a very long time. When I saw you standing by that dumpster, crying for help while everyone ignored you, I saw myself. I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let you suffer the way I did." Lily was quiet for a moment, processing his words. Then she wrapped her small arms around his neck and squeezed tight. "I wish you were my daddy." The words hit Dominic like a thunderbolt. His chest tightened. Something cracked open inside him, something he had kept locked away for decades. A warmth spread through him, unfamiliar and overwhelming. He couldn't speak. He simply held her closer. "Get some sleep," he managed at last, his voice thick. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." Lily nestled against him, her breathing gradually slowing as exhaustion finally claimed her. Within minutes, she was asleep in his arms, Mr. Teddy squished between them. Dominic didn't move. He sat there in the darkness, holding the little girl who had somehow found her way past every wall he had ever built. For the first time in more years than he could count, he felt something he had forgotten existed: peace. But across the city, Vincent Morgan was also awake, making plans of his own. The trial was approaching, and he had one final card left to play. The Cook County Courthouse had never seen a crowd like this. Reporters swarmed the marble steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Spectators lined up hours before the doors opened, desperate for a seat in what the media had dubbed the dumpster trial. Police officers formed barriers to control the chaos. Inside the courtroom, tension hung thick in the air. Vincent Morgan sat at the defense table, dressed in a somber navy suit, his expression carefully arranged into one of wounded dignity. He dabbed at his eyes occasionally, playing the role of the devoted brother forced to endure this public humiliation. Beside him, Derek Chen reviewed his notes with the confidence of a man who had won countless battles through manipulation and misdirection. Across the aisle, Rachel sat next to Anthony Russo, her face pale but determined. Weeks in the psychiatric ward had left her thin and fragile, but her eyes burned with quiet fire. Behind her, Dominic occupied a seat in the front row, Lily pressed close to his side. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Patricia Hartwell, called the court to order. Chen rose first, buttoning his jacket with theatrical precision. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, his voice smooth as silk. "What we have here is not a crime, it is a tragedy. Rachel Morgan has a documented history of mental illness, depression, paranoid delusions, self-destructive behavior. He held up a thick folder. Medical records confirm that Miss Morgan has struggled with psychiatric issues since her husband's death 3 years ago. Neighbors have testified to erratic behavior, screaming at night, talking to herself. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Several jury members exchanged glances. My client, Vincent Morgan, has done nothing but try to help his troubled sister. The prosecution's case is built on the fantasies of a disturbed woman and the misguided interference of outside parties. Chen sat down, satisfaction evident in his posture. Russo stood slowly, adjusting his glasses. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his tone calm but razor-sharp. What you've just heard is a carefully constructed lie, and we have evidence to prove it. He presented the first document. Vincent Morgan owes nearly $2 million to illegal gambling operations. He needed money desperately. His sister's inheritance was his only way out. Objection! Chen shouted. Irrelevant! Overruled, Judge Hartwell said. Continue, Mr. Russo. The second piece of evidence followed. Dr. Phillips, who provided the psychiatric evaluation used to discredit Miss Morgan, has a financial connection to the defendant. They were business partners. Dr. Phillips owed Vincent a significant debt. Chen objected again, but the jury was already leaning forward, their skepticism growing. Then came Emma Collins. The young nurse took the stand, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. She described the morning she saw Vincent at St. Mary's, grabbing Rachel's arm, forcing papers in front of her. She was crying, Emma said, tears streaming down her cheeks, begging him to stop. He kept saying, "Sign it, or you'll regret it." Chen attacked her credibility, questioning her memory, her motives. But Emma held firm, her account too vivid, too emotional to dismiss. When the judge called a recess, Vincent's confident facade had begun to crack. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but the decisive blow was yet to come. The USB recording was about to be played. The courtroom fell silent as the afternoon session resumed. Every seat was filled. Every eye was fixed on the proceedings. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what was about to unfold. Russo rose from his chair, his movements deliberate and measured. He held a small sealed evidence bag in his hand, and inside it, a black USB drive. "Your Honor," he announced, his voice cutting through the stillness. "The prosecution presents its final and most decisive piece of evidence." He lifted the bag for the jury to see. This USB drive was discovered hidden inside a teddy bear belonging to Lily Morgan, the victim's 6-year-old daughter. It contains an audio recording made by Rachel Morgan on the night she was attacked. Derek Chen shot to his feet. "Objection! This evidence is inadmissible. There's no chain of custody. It could have been fabricated or digitally altered." Russo remained calm. "We anticipated this challenge, Your Honor. We have a certified report from Dr. Harold Miller, one of the nation's leading audio forensic experts. His analysis confirms that the recording is authentic, unedited, and original." He handed the report to the judge, who studied it carefully before nodding. "Objection overruled. The evidence is admitted. You may proceed." A technician connected the USB to the courtroom's audio system. The speakers crackled with static. Then the voices began. Rachel's voice came first, trembling with fear. "Vincent, please, you can't do this. This money belongs to Lily. It's her future." Then Vincent's voice, cold and venomous, stripped of all pretense. "I don't care about that brat's future. Sign the papers. Do it now." "I won't. I can't sign it, or you and that little brat will rot in the garbage. I'll dump you somewhere no one will ever find you." The recording ended. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Then the courtroom erupted. Gasps, cries of shock, whispered curses. Jury members stared at Vincent with undisguised horror. Vincent leaped from his chair, his face contorted with rage. "That's fake! She set me up. That crazy woman recorded me without my consent. This is entrapment. Mr. Morgan, sit down." Judge Hartwell slammed her gavel. "Order! I will have order in this court." But before anyone could restore calm, a small figure stood up from the front row. Lily. She was trembling. Tears streamed down her face, but she stepped forward, her tiny voice somehow cutting through the chaos. "I was hiding under the bed. The room went still. I saw Uncle Vincent hit Mommy. He hit her again and again. She was crying. She begged him to stop. Then he dragged her away." Her voice cracked, but she continued. "I saw everything. Mommy isn't crazy. She told the truth. Uncle Vincent is a bad man. He hurt my mommy." The words of a 6-year-old child hung in the air like a verdict already delivered. Every eye turned to Vincent. His face had gone white as chalk, his hands shook, his mouth opened, but no words came out. Derek Chen slumped in his chair, his confident demeanor shattered. The jury members looked at each other, their decision already written on their faces. Vincent collapsed back into his seat, staring at nothing. It was over. Everyone in that courtroom knew it. The jury deliberated for exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes. Every second of that wait felt like an eternity. Rachel sat motionless at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Lily pressed against Dominic's side, her small fingers gripping his hand. The courtroom buzzed with nervous whispers and restless movements. Then the door to the jury room opened. 12 men and women filed back to their seats, their faces solemn and unreadable. The foreman, a middle-aged man with graying hair, held a folded piece of paper. Judge Hartwell addressed him. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor. Please read it aloud." The foreman unfolded the paper. His voice rang clear through the silent chamber. "In the case of the State of Illinois versus Vincent Morgan, on the charge of kidnapping in the first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty." A wave of murmurs swept through the audience. "On the charge of aggravated assault with intent to cause bodily harm, we find the defendant guilty." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "On the charge of fraud and attempted theft of property, we find the defendant guilty." Vincent shot to his feet, his face twisted with rage. "No, this is a setup. You can't do this to me. She's lying. They're all lying." 2 bailiffs rushed forward, grabbing him by the arms. Vincent thrashed and screamed, his polished facade finally crumbling into the desperate flailing of a cornered animal. "Get your hands off me. I'll sue every single one of you. This isn't over." Judge Hartwell slammed her gavel repeatedly. "Remove the defendant from the courtroom." As Vincent was dragged toward the side door, he twisted around, his eyes locking onto Dominic with pure hatred. "You! This is your fault, Castellano. You'll pay for this. I swear you'll pay." The door slammed shut behind him, cutting off his screams. Silence fell once more. Judge Hartwell turned to address the court. "Vincent Morgan is hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for kidnapping, aggravated assault, and fraud. Additionally, the court orders an immediate investigation into Dr. Phillips for falsifying medical records." She then looked at Rachel, her stern expression softening. "Miss Rachel Morgan is declared fully exonerated of all allegations regarding her mental competency. She is to be released from psychiatric custody immediately, with all rights as a mother fully restored." The gavel fell one final time. It was over. Lily broke free from Dominic and sprinted across the courtroom. "Mommy!" Rachel dropped to her knees just in time to catch her daughter in her arms. They held each other, both sobbing, their tears mixing together. "My baby. My brave, brave baby. Mommy loves you. I love you so much. I knew you'd come back, Mommy. I knew it." Dominic remained where he stood, watching the reunion from a distance. His throat felt tight. His chest ached with an emotion he couldn't name. Rachel looked up, her tear-streaked face finding his across the crowded room. "Thank you," she mouthed, her voice too choked to speak aloud. "Thank you." Dominic simply nodded. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like vultures, but Marco and his men formed a protective barrier, shielding the small family from the chaos. The nightmare was finally over, but a new chapter was just beginning. 1 month after the trial, spring arrived in Chicago. Cherry blossoms lined the streets near Millennium Park, their pink petals drifting on gentle breezes. The harsh grip of winter had finally loosened, and the city seemed to breathe again. But for Rachel Morgan, healing would take longer than a change of seasons. The weeks in the psychiatric ward had left their mark. She was thinner than before, shadows lingering beneath her eyes. Nightmares still visited her, memories of darkness and suffocation that jolted her awake in cold sweats. Dominic had offered to let her and Lily stay at his mansion until she recovered. Rachel had refused at first. "We've already caused you so much trouble," she said, standing in the grand foyer with a small suitcase in hand. "You've done more than enough. We can't impose any longer." Dominic leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're not imposing. The house is too big for one person anyway. Stay until you're ready." Rachel opened her mouth to protest again, but Lily tugged at her hand. "Please, Mommy? I like it here. Mr. Dominic reads me stories at night." Rachel looked at her daughter, then at the man who had saved both their lives. She stayed. As days turned into weeks, the mansion began to transform. Lily became the bridge between 2 wounded souls. She pulled Dominic into her world with relentless enthusiasm, refusing to let him retreat behind his walls. "Mr. Dominic, come have tea with me and Mr. Teddy." And so the feared boss of Chicago's underworld found himself seated at a tiny pink table, A plastic tiara perched awkwardly on his head, pretending to sip from a cup the size of his thumb. Marco walked in on this scene one afternoon. He took one look at his boss surrounded by stuffed animals and nearly choked, trying to suppress his laughter. "Not one word," Dominic growled, but there was no real threat in his voice. Something was changing inside him. He started coming home earlier, skipping meetings that once seemed essential. He smiled more, though he would never admit it. The cold silence of the mansion gave way to the sound of a child's laughter echoing through its halls. Rachel noticed the transformation too. She began cooking dinner in the evenings, filling the kitchen with aromas that had been absent for far too long. The dining table, once reserved for business negotiations, became a place for shared meals and quiet conversations. One night, a scream pierced the darkness. Dominic was out of bed before he even fully woke, his feet carrying him down the hallway toward Lily's room. He burst through the door to find her sitting up in bed, sobbing, her small body shaking violently. The bad man. He was coming. He was going to take Mommy again. Dominic sat on the edge of the bed and gathered her into his arms. "I'm here," he murmured, stroking her hair. "No one is going to hurt you or your mommy. Not ever again." Rachel appeared in the doorway moments later, still half asleep. She froze at the sight before her. Dominic, the man who had seemed carved from stone, was cradling her daughter with a tenderness she had never expected. His eyes were soft. His voice was gentle. Something stirred in her chest. Gratitude, emotion, and something else she wasn't ready to name. Lily's sobs gradually quieted. As sleep began to reclaim her, she mumbled against Dominic's shoulder. "Good night, Papa." Dominic went still, but he didn't correct her. 6 months had passed since the trial. The cherry blossoms of spring had given way to summer's warmth, then autumn's golden hues. Rachel Morgan had slowly but steadily rebuilt herself. The shadows beneath her eyes had faded. Her cheeks had regained their color. The haunted look that once clouded her gaze had been replaced by something brighter. She found a job at a small publishing company downtown, editing manuscripts and coordinating with authors. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work that gave her purpose. She began saving money, making plans, preparing to stand on her own 2 feet again. But there was one complication. Lily didn't want to leave. "This is our home, Mommy," she declared one evening, her arms crossed stubbornly. "Mr. Teddy likes it here. I like it here. Why do we have to go somewhere else?" Rachel had tried to explain that they couldn't stay forever, that they needed to build their own life. But every time she brought up the subject, Lily's face would crumple, and she would run off to find Dominic. The truth was, Rachel wasn't sure she wanted to leave either. One crisp autumn morning, Lily found Dominic in his study, reviewing documents by the window. Sunlight streamed through the glass, catching the dust motes floating in the air. She climbed onto the chair beside him, Mr. Teddy tucked under her arm. "Mr. Dominic?" "Yes, little one?" Lily fidgeted with the bear's worn ear, her expression unusually serious for a 6-year-old. "Do you want to be my real papa?" The question hit Dominic like a physical blow. He turned to face her, his breath catching in his throat. Those large brown eyes stared up at him, filled with hope and vulnerability and absolute trust. "Lily, I never had a papa before," she continued, her voice small but steady. "Mommy said my first daddy went to heaven before I was born, but I always wanted one, and I want it to be you." Dominic couldn't speak. Something was happening inside his chest. A cracking sensation, like ice breaking apart after a long winter. He heard a soft intake of breath and looked up to find Rachel standing in the doorway. Her hand was pressed against her heart, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Their gazes met. In Rachel's eyes, Dominic saw no objection, only quiet hope. He turned back to Lily and knelt down, bringing himself to her level. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "Being a papa is a big responsibility. It means I'll always be here for you, always protect you, always love you." Lily nodded vigorously. "I'm sure. I'm really, really sure." Dominic reached out and cupped her small face in his large hands. "Then yes, I would be honored to be your papa." Lily launched herself into his arms, nearly knocking him over. "I love you, Papa." The word echoed through the room, through the mansion, through the hollow spaces in Dominic's heart that he had thought would never be filled. The adoption papers were filed within the week. With Dominic's resources and Rachel's consent, the process moved swiftly. Lawyers handled the documentation. Judges signed the orders. On the day it became official, Lily stood between Dominic and Rachel outside the courthouse, holding both their hands. "I'm Lily Castellano now," she announced proudly to anyone who would listen. She looked up at Dominic, then at her mother, her face radiant with joy. "I love you, Papa. I love you, Mommy." Dominic squeezed her hand, overwhelmed by emotions he had spent a lifetime suppressing. He had never believed he deserved a family. Now he couldn't imagine life without one. And as Rachel's hand brushed against his, their eyes meeting over Lily's head, he realized something else was quietly blooming between them. 1 year later, the Castellano mansion had transformed beyond recognition, not in its architecture or furnishings, but in its soul. The cold, echoing halls that once felt like a mausoleum now pulsed with life. Laughter rang through the corridors. The smell of home-cooked meals drifted from the kitchen. Toys scattered across pristine marble floors no longer seemed out of place. And at the center of it all was Lily. She was 7 now, taller, healthier, her cheeks rosy with the glow of a child who knew she was loved. Mr. Teddy remained her constant companion, though his fur had grown even more worn from countless adventures and bedtime cuddles. Dominic sat by the large window in the living room, watching the Chicago skyline bathe in the golden light of early morning. The city stretched before him like a painting, familiar yet somehow different now. Everything looked different when you had someone to share it with. Soft footsteps approached, and Rachel appeared beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one and settled into the chair next to his. They had married 3 months ago in a small ceremony in the mansion's garden. No grand spectacle, no media fanfare. Just Lily as the flower girl, Marco as the best man, and a handful of people who truly mattered. It was perfect. Rachel gazed out at the sunrise, her fingers wrapped around the warm cup. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "That day in the alley, you could have just walked away." Dominic took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "That was the best decision I ever made." His mind drifted back through the memories. A little girl shivering beside a dumpster in the rain. Those desperate, pleading eyes that refused to give up hope. The moment the lid opened and the horrible truth spilled out, Lily's voice calling him Papa for the first time. The weight of her small body in his arms. Every moment had led to this. "Papa, Mommy." The sound of tiny feet thundering down the hallway announced Lily's arrival before she burst into the room. A sheet of paper clutched triumphantly in her hands. "Look what I drew." She thrust the picture toward them, bouncing with excitement. Dominic took the paper and studied it. 3 figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun, holding hands. A tall man in a black suit, a woman with long brown hair, and a little girl in a pink dress, with a teddy bear in her free hand. Underneath, in wobbly crayon letters, were the words, "My family." Something tightened in Dominic's chest. He lifted Lily onto his lap, holding the drawing where all 3 of them could see it. "It's beautiful, Princess. Absolutely beautiful." Lily beamed, then wrapped her arms around both of them, pulling her parents into a group hug. "I love you, Papa. I love you, Mommy." "We love you too, sweetheart," Rachel whispered, her eyes glistening. The 3 of them sat together by the window, watching as dawn painted Chicago in shades of gold and rose. A family built not from blood, but from trust, courage, and love. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to listen, one person willing to believe. One moment of compassion can change everything. True wealth isn't measured in money or power. It's measured in the people who stand beside you, the love you give and receive, and the lives you touch along the way. And so our journey with Dominic, Rachel, and Lily comes to an end. From a dark alley filled with despair to a home filled with warmth and laughter, this story reminds us that even the smallest voice can carry the greatest truth, that hope can survive the darkest nights, and that family is not always defined by blood, but by the hearts that choose to love each other. Now I want to ask you, has this story touched your heart? Have you ever witnessed a moment when believing in someone made all the difference? Have you ever been the one person who chose to listen when no one else would? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear your stories, your reflections, and what this journey meant to you. If this story moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story. Every day, we bring you tales that inspire, heal, and remind us of the beauty in humanity. Thank you for being here with us today. From the bottom of my heart, I wish you good health, happiness, and peace in your daily life. May your days be filled with love and your heart with hope. Goodbye for now, and I will see you in the next video.